The sirens hadn't even faded when the front door flew open. Dennis stood still. In the center of their once warm living room, still decorated with family photos and soft golden lights, two officers pressed past the threshold. Victoria collapsed against the entryway, her makeup streaked with tears, blouse torn just enough to suggest a struggle. In her hand, her phone was still recording, a trembling finger hovering above the stop button. He hit me, she cried. He said he'd kill me if I spoke. The taller officer reached for his cuffs, already sizing Denise up. Denise didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stared at her. Victoria's sobs echoed in the quiet like stage cues, perfectly timed, almost rhythmic. She turned toward the officer with wounded eyes and whispered, I was so scared. The younger cop hesitated, looking at Dino for a reaction. Dina's voice was calm, dangerously calm. You should check the hallway camera before you make a mistake. What camera? The taller officer asked. Denison answered. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a USB drive. The red plastic casing caught the light. Everything he said is on this. Victoria froze just for a second, but Dino saw it. The way her mouth tightened, the sudden shift in her breathing, she glanced toward the hallway, toward the tiny vent that wasn't really a vent. Sir, the younger officer said, we're going to need you to step aside and let us search the property. Then he didn't resist, of course. As they moved through the house, Victoria stayed near the door, cradling herself, stealing glances at Dennis when she thought he wasn't looking. But he was. He always was. This wasn't the first time her mood flipped on command, but it would be the last. 3 months ago, he started noticing things. Tiny fractures in the porcelain mask she wore, excuses, missing time, perfume on clothes that weren't his, whispers in the hallway when she thought he was asleep. She thought he'd lose his temper. She wanted him to. But he didn't. He installed cameras instead, not to catch her cheating, though he suspected it. No, he was preparing for this moment, the moment when love, betrayal, and fear collided in a perfectly orchestrated trap. And she would expect him to break, but he documented. And now, as the USB drive sat heavy in the officer's hand, Debo walked to the table, opened his laptop, and clicked open a folder labeled Insurance. Inside were timestamp videos, raw audio, and stills pulled from 3 strategically placed cameras: bathroom mirror, hallway vent, and bookshelf. Victoria's voice echoed from a recording dated 2 weeks ago. They'll believe me. I'll cry. I'll show them bruises. They always believe women. The officer looked up, stunned. Is this real? Dennis nodded once, cold, precise. By the next one, he said, the officers had left. No arrests. Not yet. Victoria was upstairs, pacing. Her act hadn't landed like she expected, and the doubt in the younger officer's face had made her nervous. She was recalculating, rewriting her next scene. Meanwhile, Debo sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, headphones in. The USB wasn't his only copy. It wasn't even his first. He had cloud backups, encrypted drives, and a hidden network storage in the basement. He didn't trust systems anymore, not the legal one, and certainly not the emotional one he once called a marriage. He clicked through the footage again, not out of obsession, but precision. Tuesday, 2:14 a.m. Victoria in the bathroom mirror, dabbing purple tone makeup beneath her eye, posing in the reflection. She wasn't trying to hide bruises. She was creating them. Then came the audio. If I cry while I say it, they'll believe me. They always do. He exhaled slowly. What disturbed him most wasn't the betrayal. It was how calculated it all was. This wasn't a desperate woman making a mistake. This was a performance rehearsed to perfection. And he, for a time, had been cast as the villain. But he wasn't alone anymore. He had facts, timelines, metadata. He clicked another folder, journal logs. Each file was a daily entry, short, cold records, not thoughts, not feelings, just events. Who entered the house, what time, which lies were told. March 8th, claimed yoga at 7 p.m., returned at 9:42 p.m. with perfume inconsistent with her usual brand, smelled like Giorgio Armani, my way. March 12th said she was working late, recorded her on the phone whispering, he's so dull. He doesn't even ask where I am. Every lie chipped away at the illusion they had built together. Every timestamp was a nail in the coffin she hadn't realized she was building for herself. Downstairs in the room he had converted into a kind of miniature surveillance lab, 3 monitors played silently. One showed the living room, the second the bedroom, and the third the hallway, wide angle. All were motion activated. None were obvious. She hadn't noticed them. She never noticed the details, too confident in her control over people's perceptions. Remember the first time he saw the signs? She had returned from the gym, flushed, glowing, but not the kind of glow you get from cardio. There were no gym clothes in the laundry, just a dress shirt, men's, unfamiliar. That night she smiled too wide, kissed him like she was apologizing for something she hadn't confessed. That was when he installed the first camera. The second came after she started taking phone calls in the bathroom. The third, after she began sleeping on the far edge of the bed, blaming stress. At first, he thought it might be his fault. Maybe he'd become distant. Maybe she was struggling. But that self-doubt didn't last. Once the cameras went live, it became impossible to deny the truth. She wasn't confused. She wasn't unhappy. She was plotting. And now that plot was unraveling. He looked up toward the ceiling. The floor creaked above. Victoria's pacing hadn't stopped. He imagined her biting her nail, staring at her phone, wondering what he'd do next. I mean, he didn't need to yell. He didn't need revenge. He needed justice. And justice came not with shouting, but with silence sharpened into precision. He clicked into a final file, one he hadn't looked at since recording it, the one that changed everything. Victorian, stand in the hallway, her lover's voice on speaker. You'll be out of there in a week. Make him hit you. Cry hard. And her answer, casual, smug, he won't hit me. He's too smart. But they don't need real bruises, do they? Denny didn't blink. Tomorrow is court. He didn't need to win her back. He just needed the world to see who she really was. The courtroom was colder than Denny expected, not in temperature, but in atmosphere, sterile, impersonal, as if justice were just another clerical process here, carried out between coffee breaks and copy machines. He sat beside his attorney, Alina Markova, mid-40s, steel-eyed, immaculately dressed, and the calmest person in the building. Where Denis's rage simmered like black tar just beneath his skin, Alina radiated a practiced neutrality. It wasn't just her job, it was her armor. You don't talk, she whispered, not looking at him. You've already spoken with the evidence. Let it speak louder than emotion ever could. Denis nodded, hands folded, back straight. On the other side of the courtroom, Victoria made her entrance. Slowly, dramatically, like she expected a camera crew to be waiting. She wore soft pastels, her hair pulled back into a loose, almost childlike braid. Her face was expressionless, but Dina knew that expression well. It was the rehearsed mask of victimhood. She wouldn't cry yet. She was saving that for the crescendo. Next to her, her lawyer, a thin, overconfident man in a blue suit too bright for the room, flipped through papers like he already knew how this would end. Dina scanned the courtroom, sparse. A few observers, a clerk, a bailiff, and the judge. An older woman with graying curls and the kind of eyes that had seen too many stories like this. Most of them lies. Then the proceedings began. Victoria's lawyers started with the expected monologue. Quiet voice, dramatic pauses, plenty of emphasis on emotional suffering and long-term coercive control. He referenced the bruises, the emotional neglect, the fear she allegedly lived with for years. Each word twisted the narrative further from the truth. When Victoria took the stand, she was flawless. Her voice trembled on cue. Her hands shook. She dabbed her eyes with a tissue that stayed suspiciously dry. He always had this power over me, she said, her voice small, almost inaudible. I just didn't know how to leave, so I stayed, and then he hit me. Denise didn't flinch, didn't move at all. This was part of the plan. She had to paint herself as prey before the evidence exposed her as the predator. Alina waited patiently, no interruptions, no objections, just time. Time for Victoria to dig herself deeper. The judge's gaze shifted subtly between the witness and the defense table. She was reading the room. She had heard this song before, but something was off key. When it was time for Alani to speak, she stood slowly and walked to the center of the room. No questions for the witness, she said calmly. Victoria blinked in confusion. Her lawyer smirked, assuming weakness. Then Alina turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce video and audio evidence collected from within the shared marital residence. Footage time-stamped, uninterrupted, and presented alongside corroborative metadata. With the court's permission, we'd like to begin with 3 recordings. The judge nodded. Proceed. The lights dimmed. The bailiff rolled in a monitor, and the first video began to play. Victoria, in their bathroom, dabbing makeup beneath her eye, twisting her face toward the mirror, whispering lines to herself. He screamed at me. I was scared. Please, don't hurt me. Yeah, second video. Victoria seated on the couch, holding her phone to her mouth. They won't care. If I tell them he shoved me, they'll believe it. Men always lose in these things. A hush fell over the courtroom. Third video, Victoria on the phone with her lover. No, idiot, not yet. First, I need him out of the house. Then I'll fake the bruises. It's quiet, easy to manipulate. Just give it another week. Then he watched her expression morph in real time, from indignant to confused to terrified. Her lawyer stirred abruptly. Your Honor, we object to the judge raised a hand. Sit down, counselor. The silence that followed was suffocating. Alina turned to the judge again. There's more, Your Honor, but perhaps at this point, it would be appropriate to ask the witness if she would like to clarify her earlier testimony under oath. The judge folded her hands. Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened. Mrs. Orlova, do you wish to amend your testimony? Victoria's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked around the room as if searching for an exit. There wasn't one. Dina didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply watched the truth unravel her, frame by frame, just as she had intended to unravel him. Victoria's hands dropped to her lap. The tissue lay forgotten. I don't remember everything clearly, she stammered. It's complicated. The judge's tone was ice. It's about to get even more complicated. Sit down. From the back of the courtroom, a figure rose. Dimmick's last card, Irina, Victoria's former friend, and the woman Victoria had drunkenly bragged to weeks ago. She had come forward after seeing a clip Denise's lawyer had discreetly shared with her. Under oath, Irina confirmed the plan, confirmed the Photoshop apps, the fake recordings, the coaching. And then, just as Victoria buried her face in her hands, the final blow landed. A message on the record: Victoria's lover, now distancing himself, had provided a sworn statement. He never wanted this to go to court, and he didn't want to go down with her. The silence in the courtroom was no longer just tense, it was punctured, cracked open. Victoria sat hunched at the witness table, eyes wide, shoulders trembling, not with tears this time, but with something more primal: fear, exposure. The judge hadn't spoken in over a minute. She didn't need to. Her expression said everything. You thought you could play this system, but the system watched you back. Belina stood, hands clasped behind her back, calm and deadly. We have one final exhibit, she said. On the screen appeared a fourth video. This one wasn't from Dina's home surveillance. It had been captured at a cafe, outdoor seating, a warm spring day. Victoria sat across from her friend, Irina, chatting, sipping iced coffee. What she didn't know was that Irina had begun recording midway through their conversation after hearing something that chilled her. The audio crackled slightly, but was clear. At Victorian, he thinks he's so calm, that makes it easier. You know, if he ever raised his voice, I'd have had bruises and tears weeks ago. But this way, the contrast is perfect. I look emotional. He looks cold. You think the judge will even blink. Irina, Toria, this isn't a joke. Victoria: no, it's strategy. You play the part you're given. And in this game, women always win. Dennis didn't move. He didn't blink, but inside something settled, a quiet verdict in his soul, not from the court, but from himself. He had spent months feeling like the world was tilted against him. Now it was finally starting to level out. The judge looked down at the papers before her, flipping them slowly, deliberately. I assume the defense is preparing a counterclaim, she said, not even addressing Victoria's side. Yes, Your Honor, Alina replied. We'll be filing for defamation, emotional damages, and false reporting. We've also submitted a formal request to reopen custody and financial allocation discussions under fraudulent grounds. Victoria's lawyer whispered something, but it was useless now. His smirk from earlier was gone, replaced with the defeated look of a man who had backed the wrong narrative. I'd like to say something, Victoria whispered suddenly. Elena didn't object. She didn't need to. The judge gestured, you're still under oath. Victoria stood slowly, knees buckling slightly. I was scared, she began, not of Dennis, but of losing my life, my comfort. I made mistakes, yes. But I didn't mean for it to go this far. A scoff echoed from the gallery. Victoria turned desperate. You don't understand. He never touched me, no, but he left me alone, always working, always quiet, like I was invisible. I needed something real. The judge leaned forward. And so you manufactured violence, lied under oath, manipulated the system meant to protect true victims? Victoria froze. Ha! Ah. I didn't think anyone would believe him over me, she muttered. And it was the quiet confession. The judge tapped her pen once, then addressed the court. This hearing is adjourned for today. Formal judgment will be rendered within 72 hours. But let me say this now for the record. This is not just a personal betrayal. It's a betrayal of every real victim whose voice might now be doubted because of your performance, Mrs. Orlov. Dean exhaled for the first time in what felt like months. As the room cleared, Alina leaned toward him. You don't need to stay for the press, she said. They'll have questions, but I'll handle them. I'll stay, Dennis said. Just for a moment. He watched Victoria. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was just broken, not by punishment, but by the sudden collapse of her illusion of power. He could almost pity her. Later that evening, Dina stood in the quiet of his apartment, the same place that had once felt like a trap, now simply still. The cameras were still there. He hadn't taken them down, not yet. On the table sat a small hard drive labeled Final Cut. He plugged it into his laptop and copied its contents into a separate folder marked Case Archive. He wasn't going to delete anything, not out of spite, but because proof was a new form of safety. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. Thank you for what you did today. Some of us have been watching. Some of us needed to know it's not hopeless. No name, no context. But Dean and I understood. The courtroom hadn't just been his battleground. It had become a symbol of resilience, of strategy, of the quiet strength in refusing to break. He typed a reply. Truth doesn't shout, it waits. And when it speaks, it ends the noise. He powered down the laptop. For the first time in a long while, he slept and dreamed nothing. 3 days later, the judgment arrived. Dennis didn't open it immediately. He sat with the envelope on his desk, fingers tracing the edges, letting the weight of what it symbolized sink in. It wasn't fear that made him hesitate. It was the realization that this fight, this long, exhausting climb, was finally over, and he wasn't the same man who had started it. When he finally slit the envelope open and read the words, he didn't smile, he just nodded once. All charges dismissed, full legal and financial vindication, recommendation to pursue counterclaims. Victoria, it turned out, had underestimated more than just Dini. She had underestimated the system's capacity for self-correction when faced with undeniable truth. Dina stood from his chair and looked out the window. Outside, spring had arrived. A pair of birds, robins maybe, darted past, their wings sharp against the sunlit sky. He hadn't noticed the seasons changing while he was busy fighting for his name, but they had changed all the same. By the end of the week, news of the case began circulating in legal blogs and niche advocacy forums. Not viral, but meaningful, the kind of coverage that reached the people it was supposed to reach. Man uses hidden cameras to disprove false abuse allegations. Courtroom turns when footage exposes fabricated testimony. Some of the comments were skeptical, some supportive, but what mattered was that it was out there. The story had become more than personal, it had become proof. That evening, Dini found himself sitting in a quiet cafe with Alina. No press tours, she asked, raising an eyebrow over her teacup. I'm not interested in being a symbol, he replied. I just wanted my life back. She nodded. You got more than that. You got the truth to speak for itself. Eventually, Dina said. Truth, Alina said, always arrives late, but it's never lost. They sat in silence a moment longer, then Alina reached into her bag and slid a small folder toward him. These are contacts, people, mostly men, who've reached out to our firm after hearing about your case. Some of them are in trouble. A few already lost everything. Dennis hesitated. He hadn't thought about what came next. Not really. I'm not a lawyer, he said. No, she said, but you're something they haven't had yet, someone who's been through it, someone who's survived and knows how to plan for the truth, not just hope it comes. He left the cafe with the folder tucked under his arm. He didn't know if he'd call anyone, but it was there, like the cameras had been, just in case. Weeks passed. Victoria disappeared from social media. Her apartment lease ended. She moved cities. There was no counterattack, no public apology, just silence, the kind only shame knows how to wear. Dini didn't chase it. He didn't need her downfall. He had reclaimed himself. He found a new apartment, smaller, quieter, no cameras this time. He didn't need them anymore. But on his wall, framed and hanging above his desk, was a printed quote, white text on black paper. Truth doesn't always shout, but when it speaks, it ends the noise. One afternoon, he stood in that room, alone but calm, looking at the quote. Then, for the first time in months, he picked up his phone, not to check court dates or timestamps, but to call his brother, just to talk. A new chapter didn't always start with fanfare. Sometimes it began with the absence of fear. As the phone rang, Denise looked around his space. No tension, no traps. His life beginning again.